Well, at this point, we'll go straight to our first guest, Dr. Obiora Ifediora, a consultant economist on the recent World Bank report on Nigeria's economy with specific bias on the removal of fuel subsidy. Good morning. Good to have you on the morning show this morning.
Good morning, OJ. Nice to meet you, and good morning, viewers.
Fantastic. Well, as you heard in our introduction, Steve alluded earlier, the World Bank is recommending that the price of petrol be reviewed upwards to 750 naira per litre. Now, the Nigeria Labour Congress has warned the federal government against heeding to the advice of the World Bank, saying that the increase of the price in petrol would lead to anarchy in the country. What do you make of this situation?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the World Bank's, well, I would actually call it a suggestion because it wasn't particularly a recommendation in the real sense of the word, suggested that given what has been going on, given that we're still importing petrol and given that the exchange rate, the Naira is still, depreciating, that it's a bit awkward, quote unquote, that fuel prices are still kept constant at 600 and between 650 and 700 naira a litre, and suggested that in the light of all this, that we should be selling fuel anywhere from 750 naira a litre at this time. When that statement was made, from my understanding, it wasn't particularly made as a recommendation per se from the World Bank. It was just a suggestion and an observation. But because it was coming from a World Bank executive, the tendency was, for everybody to now jump on it, including Labour and all, and try and dissuade the federal government from accepting that statement. And so it's actually a way of it's actually more preventive than it is, it is a policy in itself. But coming back to the question, yes, like it was rightly said earlier on, there are parts of the country where fuel is even being sold at 700 naira and above. And so it shouldn't particularly be a surprise if, in the next few weeks or, next couple of months, we see petroleum prices, inch towards that 700 naira price and above. I know the federal government has categorically stated, and even stated recently as a response to the World Bank's recent report, that the fuel subsidy has been eliminated, that there is, Nigeria is not paying any subsidies. Some have argued, but that is not particularly, correct, because if Nigeria is not paying subsidies and going by the prices internationally and our foreign exchange, situation, we should be selling fuel at much higher prices than we do now. And so the question now remains, are we still subsidizing or are we not subsidizing? And that, will be left for debate for another day. And then of course issues have been raised as to what has happened to the money, the gains from the subsidy removal in May. What are they going to be spent on? Have they been spent already? Are they being disbursed? Is that what's being used, for our, 2024, budgetary expenditure at the moment, 2023-2024 budgetary expenditure at the moment. And so it raises quite a number of questions. But is the World Bank right in making that statement? Yes, it was an observation, and it actually fulfills, and supports the trend that we see in the market today and in the economy.
All right, Dr. Amobi, I understand what you said about World Bank not trying to be prescriptive, but just making a suggestion. But what many Nigerians will say is that each time you hear from a World Bank or an IMF, whatever they say regarding the state of the economy is more than just an observation. It's like an advice to the government. And therefore, people will say that, yes, if all the World Bank is trying to say is that petrol should be priced and bought appropriately, appropriate pricing. People would therefore say, what about appropriate income for an average Nigerian? And the thing that they will use in backing the argument is that of all the top 4 or top 5 economies in Africa, Nigeria might have the biggest GDP, but of course, when it comes to PCI to GDP and what an average worker earns, Nigeria is by far behind, say, your South Africa, your Egypt, or Algeria. And therefore, the purchasing power of an average Nigerian to deal with the issue of appropriate pricing of petrol is not ideal, is very low. And so the question would be, how come World Bank doesn't think of appropriate remuneration and revenue for an average Nigerian when they are giving such advisory, but are quick to always say, this is the ideal price that petrol should sell? What are your thoughts on those concerns by Nigerians?
Well, you're absolutely correct, Steve. Yes, income has not matched what we're experiencing in terms of increased prices of not just fuel but also goods and other services across the country. But that is up to the government itself to now make these adjustments. But the government can only adjust prices in the public sector. The private sector, income that also suffers from the same economy and the same fundamentals. We're experiencing, companies shutting down, multinationals leaving or attempting to leave Nigeria, workers being, laid off. And so it is biting hard. It is actually biting very, very hard. Government needs to do more than even what the World Bank is even recommending. We should, at this point in time, decide to be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves, what do we really want? The World Bank is only there to advise, like we said. It doesn't necessarily mean that the World Bank is now prescribing what we should do. And so we should, on our own, in the interest of the people of Nigeria, now decide that, yes, we want to work in the people's interest. Now, how do we go about doing that? The wage increase is one way of doing it, but battling inflation is another way. As much as we're all, advocates of subsidy removal, but we also have to look internally and say, in our own, peculiar case in Nigeria, what are those subsidies? Because I know we have a whole list of subsidies that that we implement today, from fuel to communications to power that has just been suspended, etc. Government should now say, okay, this basket list or long list of subsidies, which ones have the most impact on the average Nigerians and which ones have the least impact, and should start removing those ones that have the least impact. There's absolutely no reason why, and I've said this before, fuel subsidy should be removed and power subsidy, kept. Fuel has more of an impact on everyday Nigerian. It impacts transportation, it impacts the price of food in the market, and it impacts the price of everything. And so this should be one area whereby if we have to do something on the fuel side, we should have a phased subsidy removal, not just an overnight one-off thing that happened in May. From the time the fuel subsidy was announced in May, and fuel prices went up to 600 naira, 650 naira, thereabout, it has inched up gradually from 600 naira now to about 700 naira, 670, 680 in some places. But people haven't really complained much because it has been a gradual increase. If government had done that in May and said, okay, we plan to remove subsidy completely in the next 12 months, next 18 months, next 24 months, that would have eased the pain more, a lot more on the average Nigerian than just going from 200 naira to 600 naira overnight. So that shock is what we are still, the ripple effects is what is still being felt throughout the whole economy. And so, the World Bank can only do so much. It is our economy, we are responsible for it, and we should be the ones, managing what happens in our economy.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the power subsidy. You said, we've removed fuel subsidy. However, we have power subsidy. Our power is subsidized in Nigeria. As an economist, what is your assessment in terms of the removal of the power subsidy? And furthermore, you said we should leave it as an argument for another day, whether the fuel subsidy was removed or not. But the president did say in the National Assembly, he said his first fiscal intervention was to remove the fuel subsidy regime, to end the regime. So do you agree with the economists at the World Bank that the fuel subsidy regime still exists in some form? Let's have the argument today.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I actually agree with the World Bank because when you actually look at it on the surface, it's easy to say, yes, fuel subsidy has been totally removed. However, the price of oil internationally has been changing. Our exchange rate, because we import, has also, had an effect on what we import. And so at the end of it, by the time you now analyze it completely, the price or the pump price of fuel should reflect in all these variables that lead to the price of fuel. If we're still selling fuel at the same price, which means that it is now fixed and still dictated by government, then whatever difference there is between importation, exchange rate, price of crude oil internationally, etc., that bill is being paid or settled somehow by someone. And so, and that is what we call a subsidy, because a subsidy is just basically the real price less what government is trying to now pay to cushion the effect on the people. And so, yes, I would actually believe, and I could argue, that there is still an element of subsidy, that exists within the system, and government is making some type of provisions to ensure that the shock that we experienced in May doesn't prevail or doesn't, spiral out of control in the next, few months. And so, yes, subsidy there is still subsidy somehow, somewhere. Otherwise, what we're paying today in fuel shouldn't be or wouldn't be what we're paying, which is actually the point the World Bank was making, and suggesting that given all these variables, we should be paying about 750 naira per liter. And like I said earlier on, it wasn't a prescription, it wasn't a recommendation, it was an observation and a suggestion by the World Bank.
All right. Also, the World Bank also advised that the proceeds of the fuel subsidy removal be channeled towards greater provision of economic safety nets for Nigerians. But there is, as you know, a need to sustain and fully implement these actions. Now, with the Dangote refinery starting full production, how would you say this would affect the price of fuel in the long run? Some have said that it will make no difference. Oil marketers have also said that the cost of PMS should be around 1,000 naira per liter, had it been that the government, was not subsidizing the product. What do you make of that?
Well, thank you. Now, the Dangote refinery coming on stream is expected to dampen the price of fuel as it is today, because it is now making fuel available domestically and locally, and eliminating that additional cost from importation and landing, etc. And so that's the whole idea. The question now is, what percentage of Dangote's fully installed capacity is our total fuel needs? If, for instance, we're using 100 liters of fuel as a country every day, and Dangote refinery is now, comes on stream full, under full utilization, and is producing 2 liters out of the 100, then those arguing that it wouldn't make much of a difference would have a point. If, on the other hand, the Dangote's production and output makes a significant contribution to our total consumption, then we can now see a difference. So basically, Dangote would come on stream, but of course, just like any other startup, will not come on 100%. It will scale up and gradually, and depends on how fast it does that scaling up. So we're going to see a slight effect, and then see that effect increase over time, depending on what the international price of crude is at the time, and whatever our exchange rate is going to be. And so, yes, it will have a positive effect, but I think we need more of such Dangotes in the country to even start feeling the full effect, because the total demand or consumption of PMS by Nigerians on a daily or weekly basis far exceeds what Dangote can supply in the short term.
All right. Do you envisage that the advice from World Bank to the Nigerian government could become an arm-twisting tactic at some point? Given the fact that Nigeria's exposure to the World Bank as at June of this year stood at $14.51 billion. In 2022 alone, about $2.9 billion was borrowed from the World Bank. And I'm sure you also know that about $800 million was the facility that Nigeria got from World Bank to cushion the effect of the subsidy removal this year alone. So given the huge exposure that Nigerian government has, to the World Bank, do you think that it could become something of a condition by the World Bank to say that if you do not follow the suggestions that we are given, your ability to access further loan might be tied to what we advise, but which we didn't make compulsory. But then, that's something that the World Bank could say, and it could be argued that it's been done in some other parts of the world previously. Do you envisage that happening at all? And how will you think that the Nigerian Labour Congress should tackle the issue if, by some crazy chance, the fuel price goes up, and the only thing that people will say is that it is because the World Bank recommended it? What should be your advice to the NLC in that instance?
Okay. Yes, I think, and I believe, and I agree with you. Yes, the World Bank, just like any other lending institution, wants to ensure that the borrowers have the ability and capacity to pay back on the loans. And so, as part of what they advise, it's not necessary. I mean, the advice doesn't just say this is how you use the money or what you use the money on. It also covers how they will recover their money back. So yes, Steve, you're actually right. It is a tactic to ensure that we generate more revenue to pay back our outstanding obligations to them. And so I will not rule that out. That being said, on the NLC part, NLC is doing what it should do. NLC is concerned. NLC, works on behalf of the people and the workers of Nigeria. So anywhere or at any given time they feel threatened, they are going to put their foot forward, whether it's a rumor, whether it's a policy fact, but they will try to protect their workers and try to protect the average Nigerian at any given point in time. So they are doing what they'll do, and I support the NLC 100% in this regard.